Let's start. Good to see you again in the morning, waking up slowly. But let's continue our fantastic program. Today it will be full of very interesting plenary talks, so get ready. We will start with the first talk, then we will have a small coffee break, then there will be another one. And in the afternoon, don't forget there will be a poster session at the Institute of Psychology, but we will tell you more details afterwards. So now it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Nicole Hess, who is actually currently Associate Professor at the Anthropology Department at Washington State University in the United States. She has lots of experience, anthropological experience in Central Africa and with many interesting groups. She's also a trained evolutionary psychologist, and she is interested in female gossip, female friendships, and many other, non-physical aggression as well, and in competition, right, intrasexual competition. So these are really relevant and very interesting topics. So we are very happy to have you here. Thank you very much, Nicole.
All right, thank you very much for inviting us out here. We really love seeing Sao Paulo, and this is our first time here. I hope not our last. Okay, so today I'll be talking about gossip. I also do research on female friendship, female competition, other forms of non-physical competition, but today I'm just going to be focusing on the psychology of gossip. So my talk is Why Do We Gossip? Exploring causal links among gossip, reputation, resource allocation, and resource competition. So first, what is gossip? Gossip, by one kind of not controversial definition, it involves the transfer of information about the actions and traits of others. Doris Cruz, a researcher in Amsterdam, recently did an analysis of different definitions found in the social science literature and found that most definitions involved minimally a sender communicating to a receiver about a target who is absent or unaware of the content. He also found that in a lot of these studies, gossip could be positive or negative, and it was often informal rather than formal. More popular non-academic views of gossip range from gossips being a trivial activity to being so dangerous that sometimes schools have to ban it because it's harmful. So why do we gossip? Why do we invest so much time and attention into gossip? And can an evolutionary perspective help us understand this phenomenon? And I've got a series of studies to present for you today. Most of them are experiments, some are in small-scale societies. And my goal is to kind of convince you that gossip is not trivial, that there is some structure to the psychology of gossip, whether you're a gossiper or a person who's hearing gossip and evaluating it and using it to make decisions, and that also there are real consequences to gossip. It's not just trivial. Okay, so in the evolutionary literature, there are roughly two camps for theories of gossip. The first one is the social cohesion theories, which are where gossip, I'll get to that, and the others are the social competition theories. Should I hold this further? Okay. So first, the social cohesion theories. Social cohesion, or sometimes called the pro-social theories, view gossip as a means to increase cooperation within groups, where pro-social strategies benefit others or the collective. Gluckman was an anthropologist who first wrote about this in 1963, suggesting that gossip maintains the unity, morals, and values of social groups. Dunbar is a more recent evolutionary thinker who in 2004 proposed that gossip and language more generally evolved to facilitate social bonding and social cohesion in the very large groups that characterize human primates. So in non-human primates, there are arguably smaller group sizes where bonds can be maintained and established by physical grooming, physically touching each other. But human groups are so big, you couldn't possibly touch everyone enough. So gossip came to replace social grooming, and it allowed us to live in these very large groups. That's Dunbar's idea. although there have been some pretty big challenges to that idea, including a 2016 paper that showed kind of a lack of this correlation in cross-species studies. Some more recent studies of gossip in the kind of social cohesion camp suggest that gossip functions for learning norms, enforcing norms, sanctioning those who violate norms, imposing social control, or policing others in the group for the better of the group. Then we have the second camp, the social competition theories. A lot of researchers, including evolutionary and non-evolutionary theorists, have suggested that gossip is used to strategically manipulate reputations. And so you'll probably see some names of some familiar evolutionary psychologists up here. Toward the end are some old anthropologists, one of them being Payne in 1967, wrote a response to Gluckman's ideas of gossip being something that serves the group. Payne said that gossip serves oneself. So the social competition theories, or the pro-self theories, suggest that people gossip in order to manipulate reputations to benefit oneself, one's kin, or one's allies. Gossip about the bad behaviors and traits will decrease a target's reputation, decreasing their access to contested resources with the effect of increasing your own access to those resources. Okay, so previous research has shown that access to resources is indeed mediated by reputation. So humans often get resources from other group members when they have a good reputation. So Kristen Hawkes, for example, in '91 has her famous paper where those who undertake risky behaviors and succeed increase their access to a valuable resource, mates. Previous research is out there that has demonstrated that access to resources is mediated by reputation, and this includes theoretical and empirical work by evolutionary biologists, anthropologists, economists, and others. So this large body of research suggests that good reputations are correlated with receiving benefits. In both the social cohesion and social competition theories, gossip is assumed to cause changes in individuals' reputations, which then cause changes in the likelihood of those individuals getting benefits from the rest of the group. But there's little experimental evidence from small-scale societies that support these causal relationships. In a lot of these studies, they're assumed. And even when they do have studies of small-scale societies, they're typically observational, not really experimental, so causality cannot be inferred. There's also very little experimental evidence in non-small scale societies that when making decisions, people pay attention to gossip in deciding how to transfer, to allocate resources. So here are the studies that I'm going to present. I worked with Aqua hunter-gatherers, Ingandu horticulturalists, an online international mechanical Turk sample, US undergraduates, and German participants. And in these different populations, we looked at the relationships between gossip, reputations, competition, and receiving benefits. And so again, I'm hoping to convince you that there is some structure to gossip, that it's not trivial, and that there are consequences to it. And often, the consequence has something to do with altering reputations to benefit oneself or one's allies or kin. Okay, so first study is the Aqua forager study. They are hunter-gatherers who live in Central Africa. So on the left is the country of Central African Republic in Central Africa. And on the right, let's see if I can do this. The capital is Bangui. You take a plane into Bangui from Paris, and then we took a several-hour drive in kind of a scary truck to the village of Bagandu. And from this village, it's a horticultural village, there are several trails that radiate out into the forest. And those trails are maintained and taken by Aqua foragers, and they lead into different cleared areas where they establish temporary camps. So what we did with the Aqua hunter-gatherers was we asked adult informants to rate their community members, their group members, on reputation-relevant traits, like how angry does this person get, and whether they give and receive benefits. And then, of course, we looked at sex and age and kinship. So this is a young Aqua man. The Aqua live in small camps, again, radiating from a farming village. one of the main ways that they get food is that men and women, husbands and wives, typically hunt together using nets and spears, trapping small game like a forest antelope, which is like kind of a small miniature goat-looking animal called a duiker. Both sexes gather plant foods, but only men gather honey. It's a little bit more risky. You have to be strong to climb up into a tree to access them. Like many foragers, the Aqua tend to be quite egalitarian, and they don't have a lot of gender inequality, and they don't have a lot of age-based inequalities. They maintain this ethic through avoiding prestige and demand sharing. Demand sharing is if I have something and someone says, oh, that's nice, give it to me. I'll say, okay, and it's yours. There's no conflict over it. Someone asks, you give it. And this really maintains the egalitarian ethic that they really, really value. Another thing that they very much value with the Aqua is a appreciation for and a respect for the forest. They're hunter-gatherers who, if they wanted, could probably switch to small-scale horticulture, but they don't. And when you ask them why, well, right, so small-scale horticulture, you have more reliable access to food. There's less stress. But they say that they prefer hunting and gathering because the forest gives them what they need. They don't want to sit and be a member of a village. They want to be free among the forest spirit, and it makes them feel good. So if you want to know more about the Aqua, you can read Barry Hewlett's 2014 book, where he talks a lot about the Aqua and Congo Basin foragers, some nearby groups. A little bit more about them. Genetic evidence indicates that Congo Basin foragers are one of 3 major lineages of humans, the other 2 being Southern African groups, foragers, and then the rest of everybody else in the world. There are Western and Eastern groups of Congo Basin foragers. The Aqua are in the West. They're very mobile, and they get a lot of their calories from hunting for meat and honey and gathered plant forest matter. But what they also do is regularly trade their meat with the members of another local horticultural group called the Ingandu. The Ingandu grow stuff in their gardens, and it's usually starchy crops, and they trade it with the Aqua for hunted meat. In addition, the Aqua regularly work in the gardens of the Ingandu in exchange for sometimes money, and then also some of the crops that they contribute to growing. This here is an Aqua camp. It's in a clearing. Camps usually last a couple weeks to a couple months. And you can see here that it's a little bit misty, and it's usually in the center of a cleared area of a really lush rainforest. And these are different huts. They're spherical shaped. The huts are built by women out of local forest materials, and they're probably spherically shaped because a sphere requires the least amount of building resources. Inside the huts, there's not much, but there's a mat upon which people sleep. Men and women, spouses sleep together, and often their young children co-sleep with them in the same bed. Okay, so an overview of this study. We looked at the relationships between participants' peer-related contributions to the group, costs imposed on the group by each individual, and reputations of individuals and how they got benefits. Contributions to the group were assessed by peer rankings of being a hard worker, sharing, and being a good parent or alloparent. Peer-rated anger was associated with hitting and viewed very negatively based on a study that I did a few years prior. So we measured peer-rated anger as a measure of costs that people can impose on the group. Because inclusive fitness is important to all of our evolutionary stuff, we also measured relatedness. We got an index of kinship. And then we looked at age and sex, of course. Oh. Shoot, hang on. Okay. So we worked with camps that existed along 2 different trails, and our sample size was, in these camps there were approximately 50 total adults in the 2 camps combined. We were able to access about 40 adults who agreed to have their photograph taken. So we brought a camera with us, and we brought a little color printer. We privately interviewed 31 of those 40 people about everyone in the 40 photos, and then we worked with interpreters who spoke English and Diaka, the Aka language, or French and Diaka to conduct roughly 30-minute interviews with these 31 people. To estimate kinship, we had each participant say the names of their 2 parents and their 4 grandparents. We constructed a kinship diagram and then confirmed whether it was accurate by talking to the camp leader, and we were pretty close. So participants, our 31 participants, answered 2 to 3 of this list of questions about every one of the 40 photos that they saw. So to answer these, and we used just 2 to 3 questions because going through 40 photos for 2 to 3 questions is actually, it takes quite a bit of time. So we didn't try to ask everybody every question. It would not have been possible. And the Aka don't use numbers, and so we would ask them, is this person, for example, does this person work more or less than other Aka? And so it would be positive or negative or neutral. And then if they said more, do they work a little bit more or a lot more? And then it would be a +1 or a +2, a little bit less or a lot less, -1 to -2. So we were able to kind of turn these abstract numbers, pull these abstract numbers from people's ideas about less and more. So the questions were, does this individual in the photograph work more or less than other Aka? Does this person share more or less than other Aka? Is this person a better or worse parent than other Aka? Is this person more or less angry than other Aka? When people talk about this person, do they say more good things or more bad things? And then do other Akas share more or less with this person? Each target score was calculated from what informants said about them, and we explored which variables predicted how much others shared with the target. So many of our participants were biological relatives, and a lot of them had extensive real-life relationships. And so because of these complex relationships among the variables, we took an exploratory data-driven approach, performing a PCA on all of the study variables and then fitting a Gaussian graphical model. 21 women and 19 Aka men lived with an average of 7.6 biological kin in the sample from these 2 camps. The average relatedness to your kin was 0.3, which is kind of high. You can compare that your grandparent is related to you by 0.25. The average relatedness of the entire sample for each individual was 0.034. 12 people had no biological kin in the sample, and so there's a good amount of variance there. And then on the right are the summary statistics for age and the answers to all of the questions, and then average relatedness. And about 40 people answered. We had for 40 people for all of these. Okay, so participants rated peers on the traits, and the PCA shows which variables co-vary. We computed age separately, relatedness separately. So the PC1, which is the first panel on the top left, and also the x-axis on the graph, included works hard, high relatedness, being older, and being angry. These are positively correlated. So our interpretation was that older adults with relatives were contributing more to the camp. PC2, which is the second panel on figure A, or the y-axis on figure B, includes reputation, receiving benefits, and parenting quality. And if you look closely at the dots up on the kind of top right quadrant, there's mostly red dots. Those are the women. And in the figure B bottom left area, they're mostly purple dots. Those are men. And so our interpretation here was that women who are good parents are getting benefits from the men. PC3, which we don't have on the lower graph, just on the upper right panel, included sharing and relatedness, and our interpretation was that people share more with their kin. So all taken together, this might suggest that there's a sexual division of labor where men are producing a surplus that's transferred to good mothers. Figure C, this is all the same data, but here we just have correlations between each pair of variables controlling for all the other variables. Red is a negative correlation and green is positive. And the short story take-home message here is that women get more benefits regardless of reputation, but those with good reputations also get more. Oops, I was supposed to shorten that. Oh well, okay. So I'll read you this slide that I failed to save after I summarized it and made it a little shorter. So taken together, these results support the prediction that good reputations are associated with receiving benefits and that reputations are positively influenced by contributions to the family. Contributions to the family and community were associated with a good reputation, which was associated with getting benefits. We also found that inclusive fitness was at play here. Genetic relatedness helped explain the transfer of resources, sharing. And finally, our results show that there's a clear sex difference, maybe due to a sexual division of labor, where women are rated as better parents and they also receive more benefits. Okay. So that was an observational study. The next studies I'm going to present are all experiments. So hunter-gatherers are really ideal for evolutionary research, but small-scale society studies are limited by sometimes small sample sizes, and also a lot of them have just been observational, so we can't infer causality. All of these next are experiments where we randomized participants into manipulated conditions that were theoretically relevant, where causal inferences would be possible. And these types of experiments are used in a whole bunch of disciplines: political science, anthropology, economics, etc. So what we're testing is whether hearing gossip about a target impacts how likely the benefit is to the participant is to give the benefit to the target. So this next study was done with a mechanical Turk population, an online international sample. Each participant, this is just the overview, read one of two scenarios that place them in a relationship with a target of the same sex. All of the next studies are just within sex to avoid confounds of mating psychology. So they read a scenario, and then they read several positive and negative statements about the target that concerned either family or work matters, and then they indicated how likely they would be to provide valuable resources to the target, as well as their impression of the person in the target. So participants were randomly assigned to read either a work story or a family story. The work story was essentially the participant works at a company and they have the opportunity to give a salary increase, a bonus, to one of 10 employees that they supervise. One of them is named Dave or Elizabeth. How likely are you to give them the benefit after reading these gossip statements? I'll talk about in a second. The other vignette was related to family matters. The participant has inherited some valuable paintings and has the opportunity to give it to one of their cousins. How likely are they to do it? So following reading one of those two vignettes, participants read several gossip statements about the target. Some of the gossip statements were relevant to the work context and some were relevant to the family context. And so these statements we had to create. And in order to do this, we thought of what are a bunch of things that people can do in a family context that would cause you to have a bad reputation and people to not want to give you stuff versus give you stuff, and then same thing for a work context. So we wrote a bunch of statements, and each statement had a positive version and a negative version. So positive statements for work would be Elizabeth is enthusiastic with customers at work. The opposite of that would be she's unenthusiastic with customers at work. For the family condition, a positive statement would be Elizabeth loves her siblings, and a negative version would be Elizabeth hates her siblings. We had 130 separate mechanical Turk participants read a short vignette and then read these statements, and they rated each statement from 1 to 9, which is it's very good or very bad. And for each statement, the mean rating for the positive version was higher, and the mean rating for the negative version was lower, so we retained those statements. Positive statements were seen as positive and negative were seen as negative, so we went on to use those in the actual experiment. Okay, so for the experiment, participants were randomly assigned to read either the office or the work vignette, and then they read a mix of positive and negative statements about work and family. And if you read the work vignette and you read a work gossip statement, we would say that that statement matched or was context relevant or relevant to the scenario. If you did a family vignette and read family statements, those would be relevant. If you read a family vignette and read some work statements, those would be irrelevant. And so what we were trying to assess was whether the relevance of the gossip mattered. So non-matching statements were incongruent, matching statements were congruent or relevant. Then after reading all of these statements, we asked them how likely would you be to give the raise or the painting to Dave or Elizabeth, and then also asked about people's impressions of the target. We had some additional exploratory variables, and our predictions were that more positive to negative gossip would cause participants to be more likely to give the benefit, that context-relevant gossip would have a bigger impact than irrelevant gossip, and that the effects would be mediated by participants' impression of the target. So this was our sample. There are about 120 people, mostly from India and the US, and the rest were from some European countries. Mean age was 34, 56 females, 64 males. And so these graphs have these figures have the results for both the work and the family scenarios. Hearing more positive gossip relative to negative gossip led to a higher likelihood of giving the benefit, largely mediated by the impact of gossip on reputation. Family gossip had a bigger impact on giving after reading the family vignette, and work gossip had a bigger impact on giving after reading the work vignette. We didn't really find any direct effects of sex or age. So, to summarize, gossip and reputation impact how likely participants were to allocate benefits to others. Gossip relevance matters. Congruent gossip had a bigger effect than non-congruent gossip. And next, we tried to replicate this study in a small-scale society. So again, we're in the Central African Republic. This time we're working with a different population, the Ingandu horticulturalists, who live in roughly the same area as the Aqua. These are the villagers, whereas the Aqua are the ethnic group that live in the forest. These are some Ingandu women. They practice slash and burn horticulture. They live in a small village named Bagandu in southwest Central African Republic. Some of the foods that they grow include manioc, corn, plantains, and other crops that they grow in extensive gardens surrounding the village. They have some market integration with families selling their surplus crops, such as coffee. They do also trade their crops with Aqua hunter-gatherers, where the Ingandu give them starchy crops, and the Aqua trade them for meat that they hunted or honey. And then the Aqua often work in the gardens of the Ingandu in exchange for starchy crops and sometimes other types of small gifts, and sometimes money. So on the left is an Aqua man, on the right is an Ingandu man, and on the right is an Ingandu woman. And the guy on the left is wearing Western-style clothing, and that's because the Ingandu do have access to a Western market through a long chain. The woman on the right is wearing textiles that were probably made in the neighboring country of Congo, and so they have access to market stuff. This is an Ingandu husband and wife, and when we first kind of set out to do this study, we were thinking, what will be our scenario and what will be our gossip statements? And in the Ingandu, witchcraft accusations play a really important role in their everyday lives. Typically, they arise over jealousy or others' accumulations of wealth, and so people gossip that they've gotten these benefits because of witchcraft, or that they've lost benefits because of witchcraft. And so we started writing our scenarios and gossip statements about witchcraft, and then told our research assistant, and he said, don't joke about witchcraft. No. Someone would be very upset. No, you cannot use witchcraft. So we changed our scenarios entirely. We worked for several days with our research assistants to come up with scenarios and statements. One more thing about the Ingandu, they strongly value a reputation for generosity, and they typically transfer a lot of materials along paternal and maternal relatives. Their language is typically Ingandu, which is a Bantu language, and then Sango, which is the national language of Central African Republic, but a lot of men also speak French. They are not egalitarian like the Aqua. There's a much more hierarchical organization where age and sex matter, and there are also some formal status roles, such as the elected village mayor. Polygyny is common, and co-wives often compete for resources. And these are two Ingandu women with their young children. In addition to horticulturally produced foods, there's a small market in Bagandu that carries baked goods and fabric and processed foods. And then on the top right, this is a big tarp laid out with I don't know, millions of caterpillars that have been foraged. When we arrived in 2012 in August, it was just the beginning of caterpillar season, which is a 2 to 3 week period where caterpillars are growing and feeding, and there's tons of different species of them, and in some places they're literally just falling out of trees and you can collect them, and some of them are very poisonous, some of them need to be heavily processed to be used as food. These particular caterpillars were being dried, and then after they're fully dried they grind them into a powder that's kind of like a black flour, and you can use it for a bunch of different types of foods. Some of the caterpillars are more prized than others. We went to one market and there's a caterpillar that was big as this microphone, and it was fat and writhing and colorful, and apparently the ones with more fat taste like bacon. A little bit more on the Ingandu. Shortly before we arrived in the village, diamonds and gold were discovered nearby, and this created jobs for local men to do some mineral mining. And when the mineral mining is a really dangerous activity. They use dynamite, they blow a hole into the ground, and then a group of men go in and attempt to find as many diamonds and bits of gold that they can. And then in the process, though, the blast created by the dynamite causes the walls of the pit to be very unstable, so often the walls will fall in and crush individuals to death. Sometimes also the underground water will rapidly flood into the bombed out hole, and people drown all the time from this. But the benefits are really high. If you find diamonds or gold, it's extremely valuable, and you can buy really nice things like this guy who has his motorcycle. So mining is dangerous, but it can result in windfalls that can be really beneficial. A few months after we left, Central African Republic plunged into a civil war that's still ongoing, so we haven't been able to go back there for quite a while. Okay, so the experiment. For the mechanical Turk experiment, participants read the stimuli. For the Ingandu version of this, we had Ingandu research assistants who helped us design our stimuli and who worked as our translators to run the study. So each participant listened to a translator tell one of 2 vignettes and then read the positive and negative work and family gossip statements. And Ingandu do work with numbers, so they were able to rate things on a numerical scale. And again, our research assistants helped us create the vignettes. So each Ingandu participant listened to a translator read them one of 2 scenarios that put them in a situation with a same-sex target to whom they could allocate a resource. The family scenario involved the participant being the executor of a parent's belongings, and the participant has to decide whether to give a valuable article of clothing to their sibling at the parent's death. And the sibling is an Ingandu sibling named Michael or Marie. In the work scenario, the participant is the boss, the patron, of several same-sexed Aqua workers on their manioc garden. The participant gets a windfall and has to decide whether to share with a particular worker named Malasa, a common male Aqua name, or Mali, a common female Aqua name. So they heard their stimuli, and then they learned of several negative and positive gossip statements that were relevant to the target's family relationships or relevant to the target's work-related behaviors. And then participants also indicated their impression of the target, and the French word we used was opinion, and how likely they were to give the target the resource. Our predictions were that when there were more positive relative to negative statements, that would cause participants to be more likely to give the benefit. We predicted that context-relevant gossip would have a bigger impact than irrelevant gossip, and we predicted that the effects would be mediated by participants' impressions or opinion of the target. So again, we needed some culturally relevant stimuli. We used the common Aka and Ingandu names. I all started with M, and some examples of our work gossip statements were M does or does not steal corn from his or her patrons, or M always never finishes their work. Another one that was kind of fun was when they're working, they step on the plants. They do or they don't. Some examples of family gossip statements included M does or does not give money to his or her family, and M says good or bad things about their family. We had 39 independent Ingandu individuals rate statements for goodness or badness from +2 to 0 to -2, and then we only retained the statements that those participants indicated as divergent enough. So I have 4 vignettes here. I'm just going to read you this one so you can get a feel for it. And this was translated into Sango and for a couple people in French. And this is a male version, and this is the family vignette. Imagine you have 5 brothers, and you have spent the last year working in Bangui. You have not seen your brothers for the last year, and your father has died. You are the héritier, the oldest same-sex child who is always the executor of the parents' belongings. And your father left you 2 very expensive Italian suits. When your father was alive, he told you that when he died, you were to give one of the suits to your brothers. Michael is one of your brothers, and you must decide to give the suit to him or another brother. Listen to these things that you have heard about Michael while you were away. And this is just the work vignette. And this involves an Aqua worker in your garden, and you have some valuable item that you can allocate to the Aqua worker. In the field, we didn't have nice, clean, white computer labs and computers to have people read our stimuli. So we actually had some paper and we wrote out our vignettes and had a very kind of low-tech way of doing this. So this is just a sample of the French versions of our 4 stimuli, the male and the female, the family and the work versions. And then for our statements, I had a bunch of paper, and I happened to bring some clear packing tape with me, so I laminated all of these little slips of paper, and each participant got a unique selection of statements. We wrote some custom software to give us a list of new positive to negative family and gossip statements to use for every individual participant. So they were numbered, and we just picked out those numbers, laid them down, and those were the ones that our research assistants read. Again, the main dependent variable was participants rated their opinion of the target and then how likely they would be to allocate the resource to the target. And so the stimuli for this, Ingandu do understand numbers, so they would point to a number, and on the right here is our recordings of their numbers. It was very low tech, it was kind of fun. And then here's just another set of questions that they answered by pointing to numbers. These are the summary statistics. There were about 78 people in the family condition and about 82 people in the work condition. And then here's the results. So hearing more positive gossip relative to negative gossip led to a higher likelihood of giving the benefit in both conditions, mediated by the effect on impression. So when you heard gossip, it impacted your impression score, and your impression score, positive to negative, strongly impacted how likely you were to give the benefit. If you had a really high positive impression, you were very likely to give the benefit. If you had a low negative impression, you were unlikely to give the benefit. And we also did find support for the hypothesis that context relevance matters. In the work condition, work gossip had a bigger effect on giving, and in the family condition, family gossip had a bigger impact on giving. Okay, so to summarize, we had the Aqua forager study where reputation was associated with getting benefits, observational. In the mechanical Turk and Ingandu experiments, gossip positivity versus negativity and relevance caused differential resource allocation mediated by reputation. So if those with good reputations get more resources than those with poor reputations, then gossip might be an evolved strategy to compete for valuable and scarce material and social resources. So the next experiment has a number of conditions, and we asked the question, does competition cause participants to gossip? And again, we looked at some of these variables. Is the gossip relevant? Is the gossip positive or negative? And do features of the contested resource also come into play? So for an overview of this next experiment, the competitive gossip experiment, the general design had the same elements of the previous experiments. Participants read a vignette in either a work or a family context, and then read several negative and positive statements about the target. However, instead of indicating how likely you were to give a benefit to the target, after reading a gossip statement, you said, how likely am I to tell this statement to someone else? So participants were now gossiping about the target. They were randomly assigned into manipulated vignettes, and there were about 66 people per condition, and we didn't do every possible combination of the multiple variables. We kind of kept it simple to reduce our need for massive numbers of participants. Okay, so our predictions were that if gossip is useful in reputational competition, then gossip content should target aspects of reputation that are most relevant to the context. Competition over food might inspire negative gossip about previous food sharing, but not necessarily negative gossip about fertility. We also know that in animals, resource scarcity and resource value increase competition. There's a number of studies in primates that have looked at this, and so inspired by animal models of resource competition, we predicted that participants would transmit more negative gossip about their competitor target and less positive gossip about their competitor target when the thing that they are competing for is valuable and scarce. So we change these variables, the 3 red variables, in the next several slides. So our first prediction was that the content of gossip about a competitor is relevant to the context of the competition between the gossiper and the gossipee. So again, we used vignettes. This was an online survey. There's an office version and a family version. In the office version, you know about a person who works in the office with you. In the family version, you know about a cousin who happens to live in your same neighborhood. So they read about a target, and then they gossiped about the target by reading a factual statement and then indicating how likely they were to transmit the statement. So our prediction was that in the office condition, participants would relay more office gossip than family, and in the family condition, they would relay more family gossip than office gossip. So for our results, we computed positive and negative gossip scores separately for office gossip and family gossip. Higher values indicate a greater likelihood of transmitting the gossip. And in the left panel, family gossip was more likely to be transmitted after reading the family scenario and less likely in the office scenario. On the right, work gossip was more likely to be transmitted in the office condition and less so in the family condition. There wasn't a lot of difference between the positive and the negative gossip, though. As predicted, gossip scores were family biased in the family condition and office biased in the office condition, and this was a large effect with a D of about 0.88 to 1.1. Second prediction version of this experiment: if gossip is used strategically to increase access to contested resources, participants should transmit more negative gossip and less positive gossip about a competitor when the contested resource is high value versus low value. So if the thing that you are competing over is really valuable, you're going to gossip worse about your competitor. That's the general idea. And for this, we were done looking at context relevance, so we picked only the office vignette and then added some manipulations to it. Imagine you work in an office, your company has done well, your supervisor has said that there's going to be a promotion, you are a candidate, this coworker, Elizabeth or Dave, is a candidate, and the promotion comes with either a small or a large salary increase. And we measured again participants' likelihood of relaying positive and negative gossip to a coworker about the target that they were competing with. And as predicted, a large salary increased the use of negative gossip relative to a small salary. But contrary to predictions, there was no significant effect of salary size on positive gossip. So the more valuable the thing is that you're competing for, the more likely you are to spread negative gossip about a competitor. That says a lot. Third prediction for this experiment: if gossip is used strategically to access contested resources, participants should transmit more negative gossip and less positive gossip about a competitor when the competed for resource is more scarce versus less scarce. So, two ways that you can place a value on a contested resource is it a good thing that you actually want, or is that there a lot of it or a little bit of it available? if you're a primatologist, you might remember some of these studies of monopolizability and non-monopolizability. That was some of my early inspiration for making variation in the value and the scarcity of these resources. Okay, because I know there's some primatologists in the audience. Fantastic stuff. Okay, so using the office vignette and only the large raise version to keep competition high, we next manipulated how many promotions there were available. You're the participant, you have a target, there are promotions that you and the target are competing for, and there's either 1 promotion, 3 promotions, or 5 promotions. There's 10 of you in the office who are eligible. Elizabeth or Dave is one of your competitors, and you sit next to them so you know a bunch of gossip about Elizabeth or Dave. As predicted, scarcer resources, fewer promotions, caused an increase in negative gossip. Contrary to predictions, scarcity did not have an effect on positive gossip. So the fewer promotions there were, the more scarce the resource, the more negatively you gossiped. Competition. So to summarize this experiment, the content of gossip about a competitor is relevant to the context of the competition between the gossiper and the gossipee. More valuable contested resources increase negative gossip, and scarcer contested resources increase negative gossip about a competitor. So these results, I think, really strongly support the social competition theories of gossip, and not really so much the social cohesion. You wouldn't be harming your competitors within the group for the benefit of the whole group. It's much more strongly supporting the social competition theories, in my interpretation. Okay. So we know that having a good reputation is associated with getting benefits, Aqua study. We know that gossip valence, positivity or negativity, and relevance impact resource allocation. And we know that increased competition causes participants to gossip in specific ways. So if there is competitive gossip, this might also imply that there could be incentives to manipulate or fabricate gossip to your own benefit. And so if people do gossip in self-serving ways, should maybe those who are hearing the gossip be more critical of it? Should they pay attention to figure out whether it's true or not? And so we had 3 hypotheses related to gossip believability. So the first manipulation involves source number. The hypothesis was that gossip would be more believable when it comes from multiple sources because the probability that 2 people will benefit by telling the same false story is smaller than the probability that only 1 person will. And so we had participants evaluate the truth of gossip that had been relayed by 1, 2, 3, and 4 independent sources. It was a between-subject study where you heard some gossip and you heard that Jane said it, Jane and Susie said it, Jane, Susie, and Bill said it, Jane, Susie, Bill, and Sam said it. Did increasing source number increase how much you believed the gossip? And we said, more sources should increase believability, and the participants here were 125 UCSB undergraduates. And I'll just go ahead and read the vignette. Pretend you are an employee at a company that's having a large holiday party. The party takes place after work. You're at the party, the president is there, and so is Kathy, another employee. Kathy is very talkative and friendly. You notice the president is talking to a lot of people that night. You leave the party early. The next day at work, another employee who was at the party, Linda, tells you that she saw Kathy hitting on the company president after you left. And then to different people, we said an additional person, Steve saw it, and then Rachel saw it, and then Rob saw it. And the dependent variable is simple. How likely is it that Kathy was really hitting on the company president? And as predicted, believability increased monotonically with the number of sources. The mean believability score of those who heard from 4 gossipers was 45% higher than those who heard from 1 gossiper. For 1 source versus 4 sources, the effect size was very large, D at 1.43. So the more people you hear the same story from, the more likely you are to believe it. And the biggest jump here is between 2 and 3 independent sources. Okay, so more people telling the same story increases the believability, but what if those multiple disseminators have a relationship with one another where maybe they colluded, or maybe one person just heard the story from someone else? So to be more, should our do we have structure to our way that we discern whether gossip is true or not? So, information is probably more accurate when you receive it not simply from just multiple sources, but from multiple independent sources. Independent people are again going to have decreased odds of mistakes and lying. Receivers of gossip should be more likely to believe independent gossipers than dependent gossipers. And then we said, well, what if they are maybe independent, maybe not dependent? What if they're friends and you know that they're friends? We predicted that independent sources who are friends should be less believable than independent sources who were not friends, because they probably didn't collude, but maybe more than truly dependent sources. So again, participants rated believability by two sources, and we manipulated the relationship between those two sources. We predicted that independent sources would be the most believed, and dependent sources would be the least believed, with friends somewhere in the middle. And participants here were 197 undergraduates. Pretend you're at this office party. Kathy and their boss are also at the party. The next day, Linda tells you she saw Kathy hitting on their boss at the party, and then another employee says they saw that. And then another employee who was Linda's friend says they saw that. Or then another employee tells you that they heard from Linda that they saw Kathy hitting on the boss. And again, how likely is it that Kathy was really hitting on the boss? How much do you believe this gossip? Believability increased from dependent to friends to fully independent resources. And a polynomial contrast indicated that the linear trend was significant. Okay. Finally, we thought, okay, let's see if we can work competitive gossip into this notion of a gossip receiver psychology that attends to cues associated with believability. Because competition between a gossiper and their target increases the incentive of the gossiper to manipulate their story, competition should probably decrease the believability of gossip. So participants again read a vignette and indicated how likely they believed the gossip. We predicted that competition between the gossiper and the target, the gossipee, would decrease believability. And this was a study that we did in Germany with 151 students. So here's the translation. You are an employee in an office where you work with Frau Hauser and Frau Schreiber. One day you run into Frau Hauser at a cafe during lunch. Frau Hauser tells you that Frau Schreiber was recently arrested for shoplifting. In this, we worked with some German peers to say, you know, this is plausible. The following sentence was then added or not added. They are competing with each other to become the new office manager. How much then do you believe Frau Hauser? When competition was absent, German participants believed the gossip significantly more than when the competition was present. So people are not just believing every bit of gossip they hear. They're paying attention to cues that they're getting from the sender of the gossip and the content of the gossip to evaluate whether it's true, supporting the idea that people might be gossiping competitively. So to summarize that experiment, believability increases with source number, with source independence, and with a lack of competition between the gossiper and the gossipee. So to conclude, in the Aqua forager study, reputation was associated with getting benefits. This supports the social competition and probably also the policing theories. Exploratory ideas on this is that maybe resources are preferentially going to women. In the mechanical Turk and Ingandu experiments, we found that gossip positivity versus negativity and relevance caused differential resource allocation, and this could support either the social competition theories or the policing theories. In the competitive gossip experiments, we found that relevant gossip is used more. This could support either the social cohesion or the social competition theories. In the competitive gossip experiments, we also found that scarcer, more valuable resources caused more negative gossip. This seems to only support the social competition theories, not the social cohesion theories. And then finally, the believability study suggested that more independent sources and a lack of competition increases believability, and this supports the social competition theories as well. And so for some future directions, Gossip may be a competitive strategy. It's also a non-physical form of competition, if so. There are other forms of competition, of course, including physical aggression. And so the current study that we're working on is we're trying to understand under what conditions do people use gossip to compete versus using physical aggression to compete. And our hypotheses are that when the competitor is a member of your own group, you gossip. But when the competitor is a member of an out group, you physically aggress. We are also going to be looking at sex differences in that study. And I didn't present research on allies, but I'm also doing some work on whether having an ally in this gossip competition helps you win these reputational battles. And just thanks to our Aqua, Ingandu, Mechanical Turk, German, and US participants, and we got our funding from UCSB, the Max Planck Institute for Human Development LIFE program, and Washington State University College of Arts and Sciences. That's it.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Very interesting topic. So, are there any questions, discussions, suggestions? Dennis?
Sorry, I talked too much. But I was delighted with your study. I found it straightforward and sophisticated, and I really liked it. And there were three things in particular that I was really happy to hear you do. And the first were the peer ratings. I did peer ratings with Kayapo Indians in 1977. And I lived for a year and a half among the Indian groups, and I found that these peer ratings were among the useful data that I collected. And I always wondered why people didn't use them more. And so I'm absolutely delighted to see that you used the peer ratings. It's a wonderful technique.
Yeah, I think actually our biggest challenge in that study was finding people who would be happy to be photographed.
Oh.
And because, you know, some people have ideas about photographs and, you know, what they can do to your spirit or whatever. But fortunately, you know, we took the pictures, we printed them, and then when the study was over, we gave the photographs to them. And so hopefully that didn't make them too upset. But
yeah. I only had one problem with the peer rating. I asked people who were the most aggressive men, the most warlike, and one woman I asked was a woman who had stolen from another Indian group when she was a child, and she spoke Kayapo with an accent. And I asked her, well, who are the most aggressive and warlike people? And she said, oh, Karakieri. He killed my brother and my mother and my sister.
Oh.
I thought, my God, what am I doing here? But anyway, I just thought it was a wonderful technique. And when you have small groups where everybody knows everyone else,
Yeah.
it's just so intense. The other thing I really liked, which I used and I also found terribly useful, I really like it. It matches my way of thinking, is your use of path analysis. I really like that idea because I think in terms of causal sequences, and that's the best way to do it, and I really appreciated that you're using that. And the third thing is something I didn't use, but I've sometimes had students use it, and I think it is fairly often used, but it's the idea of priming. You put a story and bury the story, and you see what the outcome is, which is fairly simple. I've had students simply make up comic strips with alternate stories and mix them up. They have to draw some conclusion, and they distribute them in a classroom. It's great for a senior thesis. I mean,
and it's fun to create these and think about the group that you're working with. I mean, I have when we were designing our stimuli, the prime for the Ingandu, we had our research assistants with us, and we spent 3 or 4 days just thinking what matters. And I don't know if you saw in the stimuli, I said, what would be something valuable? And he said, an Italian suit. And I never would have thought, what? And then for the women, it was a dress made in Congo, next door country, that was a very valuable thing. So we really just tried to pay attention to what they told us was valuable and what they thought was a reasonable scenario. And I mean, the notes that I took on this, I looked at them recently before this talk, and I had, wow, that's weird Italian, huh? Okay, did they really get these? You know, and then I asked some other folks, and they said, oh yes, that's what all men really want, is an Italian suit. And
another advantage to this technique, when I used it, all I had to really understand, I didn't have to know that much language. I got the questions down about peer reputation, so I'm talking about. I needed to get the question, then I just asked, who is, and all I had to know was the name. And so it didn't require a whole lot of linguistic ability to carry it out, so it was another great advantage. The third thing I wanted to comment on, it's just maybe a suggestion, maybe it's interesting. I was on a MA thesis bank committee, evaluation committee, and the student did a thing that I think may be relevant. It's the idea that you can increase negative reactions but not positive reactions. Kind of disappointing thing about human nature. But his study was on sports team fanatics. He basically analyzed how much people identified with their team or how fanatic they were, and he wanted to know how that affected their willingness to be generous or to harm other people. And he was from phys ed, so he used a hand grip thing. He said, oh, tell me how much you're really, squeeze it as much as you think you want to invest, or how much evil you want to do to your partner. And what he found was that fanaticism and identity with your team didn't affect at all how willing you were to be generous to your own team. On the other hand, it did affect how much harm you were willing to do to the other team.
Yeah.
and so that sounds like very similar to your findings that you can. It's easy to create negative feelings. It's hard to create positive. And of course,
I think that's more support for the social competition theories. People,
definitely.
In every other species, it's okay to say that members of the same species compete to reproduce more. But when we talk about it with humans, everyone says, no, humans are good and kind and wonderful. And
maybe not so kind, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and finally, but this is just pure speculation. Somebody else is probably going to ask it. This sounds kind of relevant to, here in Brazil, WhatsApp is a big gossip machine here. And, there are all these studies on messages being highly negative and stuff like that being sent on a lot more and that kind of thing. I don't know if you have any reflections on that. That's basic.
I don't know if I have the tech skills to do the social networking stuff, but I think about it too. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for your talk. I have a comment and then a question. I never saw Dunbar's theory of gossip as either social cohesion or competition.
That's my kind of distillation of 20 plus theories that people have for gossip. And it comes from, everybody has their own theory for gossip. And then with the evolutionary people, everyone has their own theory. And I really saw that some of them were arguably more group selection-y and some of them were more individual selection-y. And then even outside of the evolutionary people, some of the early anthropologists said it's for the group or it's for the individual. Pain was for the individual, Gluckman was for the group. And so that's my distillation. And I've talked with some of the gossip researchers out there. There's a group in Amsterdam and there's one in Italy. And they too kind of say, it's kind of helps the group or helps yourself.
Yeah.
So I think it's something out there. And I was happy to see that other people kind of saw those two distillations as well.
But yes, just because I think when a gossiper provides information to his or her partner, he's kind of providing valuable information for the second person, right? So that information could be positive or negative about someone, but it's beneficial for the second partner.
So in these two camps of gossip research, some people view gossip itself as the valued commodity that you're giving. And those are maybe some of the more group selection-y people. Others view gossip as a tool for a more tangible resource. And that would be the more social competition theories. In some of my other writings on gossip, I argue that there's kind of three parts to gossip. There's acquiring the information, there's analyzing it, which you can do with a person you're gossiping with, and then there's disseminating it, which is also called gossip, telling everyone. And I would argue that most of the gossip that we do is acquiring it and analyzing it, and then we only disseminate it when the time is right, when it's time to compete with someone. So we might hold a whole bunch of gossip for ourselves, so we're not sharing it until it benefits ourselves. And the social cohesion theorists really look more, they do a lot of economic experimental games, and they look more at gossip itself as the valued resource, and the gossip behavior is much more the dissemination part, not the processing and detective work. So, and we certainly do all three of those, but some of the researchers emphasize different aspects of the phenomenon, I would argue.
And I have a question. If you have any insights on cancel culture, because I think it's very damaging for the target, right?
Yeah, I mean, cancel culture comes when somebody disseminates the gossip. And I think that cancel culture, I would guess, it seems to be the case that people who are canceling other people don't like them and don't want their political views, and they increase their own power by disseminating gossip in a way that removes them as a competitor. Yeah. Thanks.
Other questions? Oh, sure.
So I was curious about the Aqua community because the research was with some pictures of people they knew about. If it had any negative impact on them, because later on they might have talked about it, you know, like, so have you seen, what did you say about someone? What did you say about Sam? And they would start to think about questions they weren't thinking before.
I definitely saw that there was some variation in the enthusiasm that some people had for telling us what was going on. And I did see some people were more hesitant to say anything, so they said 0, 0, 0 instead of. But we also had everybody, we interviewed in private with no other member of their group near them, and we had our IRB approval to make sure that, you know, they knew that we would never say anything about this to anyone, and we read all of that to them. And then at the end, we gave them their photograph. And so we did still have, you know, a digital copy of it, but we hope that kind of giving them these pictures back might make them worry less about what we had all been saying. But we didn't really hear any feedback. And this study we did do kind of right at the end of our field visit because it was caterpillar season and we couldn't access any Aqua because they were out gathering caterpillars. And then the last 3 days of our time there, we could finally run the study. And that's partially why we only had 31 raters instead of all 40 come back. But yeah, it is something, you know, absolutely that you want to consider. And we really did do our best to reduce harm in the population.
Thanks.
Last question, if there is one. Yeah.
I also have a question about the Aqua. You said they are really egalitarian and between generations, so there isn't a chief, there isn't a...
They don't really have a formal chief. They do often have a person who's more of a shaman role, so a person who's very skilled in healing. Sometimes that's a woman. And then they have a person who's usually older and male and the best hunter who he can't tell anybody what to do, but people respect him and they go to him for advice.
So they have an older, wiser man that they come for advice and...
Yeah, but it wasn't a formal role. It's not a head man or a tribal leader or a chief. It's just a person who has kind of earned respect through their demonstrated competence. And again, with the men, it's more the successful hunters who are older males. And with the women, it's the older women who have a lot of medicinal plant knowledge. And then the shaman who have a lot of medicinal plant knowledge and also a lot of spiritual knowledge. And those can be men or women.
But there is also a, let's say, hierarchy between parents and their children or something like that.
So, you know, of course, age, we'll always have some type of hierarchy, but the Aqua are really, they try to undo that. They really treat their children as very highly valued. I mean, some have argued that the Aqua are the most indulgent parenting culture in the world, or that's been studied. They're very just explicitly, this is my child, I love it, I will do anything for it, and it's more valuable than myself. They're very, and everybody loves kids.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fathers as well, especially.
Yeah, okay, I said it was the last question. So thank you very much again, Nicole, for a very nice talk.